Greetings, comrades! People often ask me to make videos about Soviet cartoons, and every time I'm surprised first of all that someone in the West watched Soviet cartoons, and also by the variety of the ones my foreign viewers remember. Some remember the comedy Nu Pogodi, the Soviet equivalent of Tom and Jerry about the wolf and the hare. Others watch the sophisticated and philosophical The Hedgehog and the Fog and The Tale of Tales, which won numerous awards for their unusual themes and innovative filming techniques. Or Treasure Island, which has suddenly become a meme in the last few years. All this shows how unique and authentic Soviet animation was. Where else did they make real horror films like this for young children? But 30 years have passed and the heroes of the younger generation have changed. All except one. Of the top 3 best-selling items featuring cartoon characters in Russian marketplaces, only one is from Soviet animation. The one who managed to win the hearts not only of Soviet children but also of Generation Alpha. Every person in Russia from 8 to 80 definitely knows who he is. This is not surprising, he is an extremely versatile character. He is simultaneously a symbol of the new year, the mascot of the Russian Olympic team, a cosmonaut, and an entire jet plane. He even performed on stage during the protest in Armenia for some reason. And his name is used to describe the sovereign internet in Russia in 2025. Today we will talk about him, Cheburashka. In fact, the story of Cheburashka is quite paradoxical. Today he is almost a national symbol of Russia and it's pretty well known beyond its borders. For example, he was very popular in Japan, where several local adaptations featuring recognizable characters were produced. Yet, only 4 short animated films were originally made about him, and they did not receive any major awards. According to surveys of the older generation who lived through the USSR, Cheburashka never took first place in ratings of favorite characters, always losing out to, for example, Matroskin the cat from the cartoon 3 from Простоквашино. Deservedly so, as a full-fledged character, Matroskin is leagues ahead of Cheburashka, largely thanks to Oleg Tabakov's brilliant voice acting, but still. If we consider the cartoons as a whole, Простоквашино and Nu Pogodi are much more recognizable. Many more people would name them as their favorite Soviet cartoons rather than Cheburashka. But for some reason, the individual characters of the wolf and the hare did not become popular. Matroskin the cat only stares at us from milk and sour cream packaging, while Cheburashka has become a symbol, an icon of the Soviet past, with monuments erected in his honor and thousands of folk jokes dedicated to him. Let's figure out why. First though, let's answer the main question. Who is this Cheburashka of yours? He looks like a cross between Labubu and Yoda. Okay, a creature with round ears and brown fur that walks on its hind legs. Russian. So, a bear. But here's the first shock. Cheburashka is actually not Russian. Then, who exactly is he? There's a heated debate about this. According to the story, he is a creature unknown to science who arrived in the USSR in a box of oranges, or tangerines. Only 3 countries supply the USSR with oranges: Morocco, Cuba and Israel. Growing up, I most often heard a version about Morocco. In 2025, State Duma Deputy Andrei Makarov proclaimed Cheburashka to be Jewish. Israeli Consul General Ran Gidom enthusiastically supported this version. However, in his book, Cheburashka's author Eduard Uspensky says that Cheburashka lived in the country with tropical forests. So there's only one place left: Cuba. It makes sense since he is Cheburashka after all. Finally, the craziest version of Cheburashka's origin is that he is Greek, and not just any Greek, but a very specific one. You all know him. As a member of the British royal family, the Duke of Edinburgh, Prince Philip. The fact is that when he was 1 year old, the royal family in Greece was overthrown. His father, Prince Andrew, was exiled from Greece for life along with his family, and little Philip, for security reasons, was transported to France in a box of oranges. Uspensky could have made such a funny reference. But if Prince Philip is Cheburashka, then his best friend Crocodile Gena is... By the way, what kind of name is Cheburashka? There's an answer to that too. In the book, the author describes it this way. He sat and sat, looked around, and then suddenly cheburachнулся off the table onto the chair. He got up and then cheburachнулся again. That's how he got his name Cheburashka. This word, meaning to fall or to crash, is indeed found in dictionaries, although it is considered extremely outdated. I have never even heard anyone use it in normal Russian speech. Apparently in the old days it was also used to refer to some roly-poly toys. So we figure out the name, but what about the plot? Cheburashka was walking through the rainforest, fell, stumbled, woke up in a box of oranges, arrived in the USSR, got his name, but had nowhere to go. The zoo wouldn't take him because he didn't know who he was, so Cheburashka was left alone in the big city. Fortunately, he met Crocodile Gena, who worked at the zoo, that's right, as a crocodile, and together they decided to look for friends. They succeeded even though they were constantly hindered by an evil old woman named Shepaklaka and her rat Lariska. In general, it's a fairly primitive plot that people would hardly remember half a century later if it weren't for what exactly? The charismatic characters? You could say that, but the problem is that Cheburashka, while he is cute, he isn't particularly charismatic himself. Gena the crocodile does all the most interesting things in their duo. For example, he sings Gena the crocodile's song, which serves the same function at Soviet and Russian children's birthday parties for many years as the famous English language Happy Birthday to You. Even the antagonist of the Cheburashka series, Old Lady Shepaklak, is a much more interesting and memorable character than Cheburashka. The first cartoon and story were both called Crocodile Gena and His Friends. In other words, neither Uspensky nor director Kachanov initially saw Cheburashka as the main character, even in his own story. Yet he became the symbol of Soviet animation and one of the official mascots of Russia. Why? After watching the first part of the video, you might think that I hate Cheburashka and consider this series to be a bad cartoon. Not at all. Yes, I didn't like it very much as a child. Maybe because it was a stop-motion cartoon, and I always preferred, hand-drawn ones. Now, however, I understand that if you dig deeper, it is a touching story about two lonely creatures who found each other in a big cold world. And it is actually deeper than you might think. If you wish to learn more about its hidden messages, there will be an exclusive post on my Patreon page. Go and subscribe. Overall, maybe Cheburashka is not a brilliant cartoon, but it's a good one. And the character Cheburashka is deservedly loved for being endearing, gentle and affectionate. But I'm still really surprised by how successful this franchise has become. The first novel, published in 1986, was followed by 4 animated films. The films were followed by a series of plays performed at every youth theater in the country. Plush Cheburashka toys went into mass production in the 1970s and quickly became some of the most beloved toys for children. Then, in the 2000s, Cheburashka suddenly became a symbol of Russian sports and the official mascot of the Russian Olympic team. How? Perhaps it was due to the persona of his creator, Eduard Uspensky. Paradoxically, he combined the gift of creating amazing fairy tale worlds with the ability to transform them into fruitful, long-lasting business projects. He was indeed a controversial figure. Suffice it to say that in 2020 his own daughter claimed that her father abused alcohol, was violent towards his children, and for several decades financially supported the cult of Viktor Stalbun, who practiced cruel methods of raising his followers' children. I have a video about him, of course. But let's put Eduard's personal shortcomings aside and acknowledge that it was he, his talent and business acumen, who elevated Cheburashka to the rank of a national symbol. In the USSR, Cheburashka was everywhere. On TV, Cheburashka. At the theater, Cheburashka. A toy, Cheburashka. Soviet lemonade, Cheburashka too. The youngest groups at pioneer camps were named Cheburashka and songs from cartoons were played for the youngest children in camp discos. What about the country's main holiday, New Year's? It always involved a Christmas tree and tangerines, which meant Cheburashka. In the 90s he had a good chance of disappearing forever when Mickey Mouse, Scrooge McDuck and Chip and Dale became his competitors. But Cheburashka survived and gradually began to regain strength. I suspect that it was not only Uspensky's genius as a businessman that played a role here, but also serious support from government agencies. After all, Soviet and Russian cartoons are also a powerful weapon in the battle for cultural dominance. Soft power. I say this without any negativity, by the way. This soft power needed a symbol, but who would it be? Contemporary heroes such as Smeshariki and Masha and the Bear had not yet been invented. The old popular Soviet characters such as Carlson, Winnie the Pooh and the Bremen Town musicians were not quite ours, but Cheburashka, despite his mysterious origins, was one of our own, recognizable, unique and, most importantly, truly Russian. So this creature unknown to science became a symbol of Russian sport, another facet of this soft power. This collaboration was successful, memorable and popular with many foreigners. But this wasn't enough. Cheburashka needed to be promoted among Russian citizens too, especially among new generation. But how? By making a remake. Russian cinema generally loves remaking Soviet classics. Almost all Soviet comedies have been remade in the last 10 years. However, they have terrible ratings and are box office flops. The same goes for cartoons. The sequel to 3 from Prostokvashino, the cartoon series I mentioned above, was a complete disaster, as was the new movie. So, Russian filmmakers love remakes, but viewers can't stand them. They consider remakes an insult to the classics made only for dirty money. Therefore, the task of carrying on the Cheburashka franchise was quite difficult. It was solved in a non-trivial way. Cheburashka became a full-fledged movie in which the crocodile turned into a human. Released on January 1st, 2023, it instantly became the highest-grossing Russian film in history. Some noted that the film had no competition during the New Year holidays, but that's beside the point. Cheburashka received decent ratings, a stunning success for a remake of a Soviet classic. However, it also faced a wave of various kinds of criticism. Some accused the filmmakers of unfair play, claiming that competitors were prevented from releasing films or had their releases pushed back. Others noted the subpar graphics and said the film's themes were too adult for a children's film. I don't consider this to be a flaw, though. It's 100% in the spirit of Soviet animation. Finally, the most shocking complaint came from the actor and State Duma deputy Dmitry Pevtsov, who accused the cartoon of promoting LGBT because in one episode Cheburashka jokingly calls Sergei Garmash, who plays the crocodile/gardener, mom. Pevtsov, a guardian of traditional values, believed it was unacceptable for children to hear a man being called mom, even if he is a crocodile. In any case, despite my ambivalent attitude towards Cheburashka, his status as one of the most recognizable Russian brands cannot be denied, both inside and outside Russia. Some may see this as a work of Russian propaganda and dismiss his success as artificial, but I doubt that. After all, in Russia, the popularity of a character is clearly indicated by whether his name is used in Russian jokes, anecdotes. For those who don't know, Russian anecdotes are short humorous stories or dialogues with a punchline. They typically feature archetypal characters, such as politicians like Yeltsin and Chernomyrdin, a school troublemaker like Vovochka, or a charismatic movie hero like Shtirlitz. Crocodile Gena and Cheburashka are also well-known characters in anecdotes and are a big part of Russian folklore. Always as a pair, but still, this 100% proves that their popularity is real and not fictional or artificially inflated. Cartoon characters don't become cult figures overnight. Another proof is that the word Cheburashka has become a household name. For example, it is used as a nickname for the An-72 multi-purpose transport aircraft, due to the characteristic location of its engines, or Zaporozhets cars because of their air intakes protruding from the sides of the body, or maybe because of their round headlights. In the USSR, Cheburashka was also used to refer to artificial fur and half-liter bottles of beer or lemonade. However, the name Cheburashka is not always used to refer to something good. In 2014, the Russian Ministry of Internal Affairs developed the Cheburashka acoustic system to suppress mass riots. The device emits a loud sound that hurts the ears and can shoot smoke bombs and flashbang grenades. It also got its name because of the resemblance of its two speakers to the ears of Uspensky's characters. By the way, the Russian Ministry of Internal Affairs appreciates such humor. Their arsenal officially includes handcuffs named Tenderness, a baton called Surprise, a stun gun called Karas, and tear gas called Lilac and Bird Cherry. All these items and devices could have been useful to their colleagues in Armenia in 2018, when Cheburashka unexpectedly became one of the symbols of the Velvet Revolution in the country. Cheburashka was the nickname given to the country's Prime Minister Serge Sargsyan, who was eventually forced to resign. The most recent use of the term Cheburashka relates to the ongoing intensification of censorship on the Russian segment of the internet. It's no secret that Russian authorities are inspired by China's example and want the same sovereign piece of the network. This hypothetical program, which aims to disconnect the Russian internet from the global internet, has an unofficial name actively used by many media outlets – CheburNet. It's not about big ears. Back in 2014, Federation Council member Maxim Kovjaradze proposed creating an internal Russian communication network closed to access from the European Union and the United States. He suggested calling it Cheburashka. The idea was not implemented at the time, but the name stuck. In any case, let's hope it doesn't happen. Otherwise, how will you be able to watch my new videos? Thanks for watching, and as always, a huge shout out to my biggest supporters: Yelizaveta Zakharova, Kirill Klimuk, Petar Ilic, Marina Holiday, Lyudmila Ilyanova, and one more member who wished to remain anonymous. See you guys next time.